Hello, Sofa Squad, and welcome back to the damn sofa. That's a damn sofa, and that's my damn sassy sidekick, Mr. Roscoe P. Coltrane, and my damn name's Paul. Now, today on the sofa, we are going to be revisiting the Israel Keys case. This is a part 2, and specifically in this video, what we're going to do is we're going to be looking at some of the other alleged victims in the Israel Keys case. And what I've done is I basically just picked out, I think, like 3 or 4 to discuss in this video. Now, in this particular video, we're not going to be discussing Samantha because we did that in part 1. So if you do want to hear my take on that and the things that I have to discuss about that, go visit part 1. I'll put a little picture of the thumbnail up here as well as a little card that you can click to go visit that one, either before or after you watch this one. One thing I really want to look at is his reign of terror, at least the alleged one, because so much of this monster remains and will remain unknown, right? Because at this point we all know he took his own life, right? Before any justice could be served. And so there's very little that we do know about what he actually did. So there are, different cases the police are pretty sure that he did. Obviously, there's lots of evidence tying the Samantha one, but there's other ones that it's kind of like, And so there's that. Now, before we even get started, I'd always like to say thank you everybody who makes the Sofa Squad possible. I appreciate it. Roscoe appreciates it, and so does the damn sofa. It wouldn't be here without you, and I couldn't make the amount of content that I do without you, and we all thank you from the bottom of our hearts. Don't forget to subscribe to my podcast channel. The links are down below for all that fun stuff. Let's also make some room on the sofa and thank HelloFresh for making this video possible. Y'all, I totally switched it up this week and went with the veggie option, and it did not disappoint. The recipes were so fresh and so amazing. Black bean and green bean burritos, 1 pan of trattoria tortellini bake, and crunchy curried chickpeas bowls, which is what I'm cooking today. There's over 55 weekly options to choose from that feature seasonal, pre-portioned ingredients picked at peak ripeness. Not only does that deliver in the taste and freshness department, but it means less prep time and less wasted food. In fact, HelloFresh cuts down on your food waste by at least 25% compared to grocery shopping. Now, here's the thing. It's summertime, and I don't know about y'all, but Matt and I want to be out and about doing our thing, but we also want to stay on track with our health goals, our fitness goals, all that kind of stuff. I cannot stress enough how easy HelloFresh makes it to stay on track with whatever your goals are. And the recipes are so amazing, you don't have to sacrifice the flavor and good eats to continue to eat well. And look, the recipes are super simple and super quick, with meals ready in about 30 minutes or less. HelloFresh lets Matt and I cut down not only on time, but also money at the grocery store. And one of my favorite things about HelloFresh is being able to update our delivery address to have the meal shipped to wherever we are going to be at. So if you follow me, we like to go to the beach, we bop to the mountains and stuff like that. And so being able to do that helps us stay on track with everything, and I absolutely love that option. Now, another awesome option is customizing the boxes as you go along. Look, you can go ahead and swap out one protein or a side for another, or even upgrade it for a more luxe experience, or you can even add a protein to a veggie meal, like the one that you saw me cook today. If you wanted to add a protein to that, you can go ahead and do that. HelloFresh is all about tailoring the experience to you, your needs, your wants, your desires. So go ahead and give it a try. Go to HelloFresh.com and use code ReportingLiveFromMySofa16 for 16 free meals across 7 boxes and 3 free gifts. Go to HelloFresh.com and use code ReportingLiveFromMySofa16 for 16 free meals across 7 boxes and 3 free gifts. So let's get started with what is considered another pretty solid confirmed case, and that is the tragic story of Bill and Lorraine Currier. Now, where the case of Samantha showed us how Keys had become sloppy and messy, which ultimately led to his downfall, the story of Bill and Lorraine Currier shows us, at least in my opinion, Keys in his height of absolute insanity. So in June of 2011, this nice couple, Bill and Lorraine, who were described as friendly, wonderful people, they would meet a fate that is literally reserved for only the most grotesque horror films. No one should ever have to leave the earth in the way that Bill and Lorraine did. So now, as the story would go, Israel would later tell investigators that he had flown from Anchorage to Chicago with plans to visit his brother in Maine. But along the way, he would end up taking a side trip, one from hell, one might say. Now, he would end up getting a hotel, and later that night, he would head out into the darkness. Now, he would take with him supplies, some of which he had dug up from a cache that he had buried in Vermont a couple of years earlier and that he had dug up that afternoon. Now, one of the things that really creeped me out about reading about this aspect is investigators would note that when Israel was like retelling parts of the stories, and like especially when it got to some of these more grotesque parts, he would get super excited telling these and like start doing physical things, like, you know, with his hands and shaking and doing these things like that. And this was one of their measures for them to be able to tell, like, okay, he's telling the truth. It was almost like this, you know, self-pleasuring type situation going on. Like he was getting off on retelling these stories is what I'm getting at, which just is absolutely horrifying. But that's what the investigators would have to do, because they would have to kind of discern, like, okay, what's real, what's not real with this dude, because I mean, this case and his crimes and the things that he did just go so deep. It's hard to discern, you know, is he showing off? Is he lying? You know, what is real? And this became one of their markers for it. And this is one of the reasons that, again, with these victims here, he became very excited over this couple, unfortunately. Now, also during this time, the investigators were like, what's a cache? Like, what's up with that or whatever? So now it's a good time for us to talk about this, because this is one of the parts about this crime that sends chills down my spine. The pre-planning, the level of thought that went into this in this day and age. I'm just like, oh my God, this is so scary. Because here at the Sofa Squad, we're used to covering these cases where these guys and sometimes women are so incredibly stupid. They just go to Walmart and buy all this stuff in one fell swoop and they're on video. And, you know, it's very obvious. In some cases, they even buy souvenirs of the town that they're visiting at the Walmart on video. I mean, it's bad. So with Israel, he was way more swift than that, and it just goes to show how psychotically dangerous this man was. Okay, so what are the caches? So Keyes would bury these kits around the country, and they were very well hidden, and whenever he got this urge to go out and do what he did, he would dig one of these up. And you're going to see the pictures that I'm putting up here of an example of one. Now, these pictures come from the FBI page on its location. Now, you know, like I said before, we see the killer's MO, and y'all, they're not this pre-planned out. I mean, you see how he has buried this, and oftentimes the stuff that's in it is coming from different places, different states, all this kind of stuff, and it could have sat there for a couple of years. So in one sick way, it's absolutely genius, because obviously for him, this would work to his advantage, but then also in another sick way, it's absolutely mind-boggling and so scary. Now, one thing that I should say before we continue is that, you know, at this point in the game with Keyes, you know, confession and talking to the FBI, is he's wanting the electric chair. One of his motivations is not wanting his daughter to be exposed, right? He was very adamant on wanting to kind of keep her hidden, that kind of thing or whatever. So he wanted the electric chair, right? And the FBI is like, well, you need to give us something. You need to give us something. The Curriers were one of his pawns, right? He was going to sit here and be like, well, here's this information. That's another way that the FBI was able to match all this information up and be like, okay, he's, you know, probably not lying, and he's doing the creepy stuff too. While he tells the story, this is not good. So that's going on. So again, this dude right here, he doesn't pretend to care about these people, not just the Curriers, but anybody, right? Literally, this guy has zero self, you know, awareness, conscious, any of that kind of stuff, no empathy, any of that, right? The only person that he seemingly seems to care about is his daughter, which shocks me. One thing that I think we see is even that these other killers and whatnot is they pretend to be human. They pretend to care, even if it's just to get out of trouble or to garner like some kind of narcissistic, you know, supply from people. Israel doesn't seem to do that. He just doesn't care. These are literally just like, these people don't matter to him whatsoever. So anyways, there's that. Just keep in mind that he is using this information simply as a pawn. He could care less if they were ever found or not. Okay, so let's keep going a little bit deeper into this trip that he made. So he describes flying from Anchorage to Seattle and then to Chicago and then renting a car, at which point he drives east to visit his brothers in Maine. Now he would stop in Indiana and then he stops into his old farmhouse that he owned in upstate New York. Then he continues on and he checks into the Handy Suites in Essex, Vermont. Now he'll spend a few days fishing, and one evening he heads out into town on foot in the darkness. Now this is where he carries that supplies and the cash, as well as some from home and some that he bought from Lowe's earlier that day. Now at first he said he was staking out the apartment complex across the road from his hotel and that he was hoping to find a guy, but that guy was too quick getting into his apartment. So Keyes continues on his hunt that evening, and then he decides he will find a couple, and he heads out again later that night, and he ends up finding his ways to the Curriers. Now he'll say that, he stakes the house out that evening. He wants to make sure there's no pets and no children. He's like, I don't want any dogs barking, I don't want that kind of thing going on, and kids are off limits. Now we'll talk about the kid thing later, because even though he says that, I'm not 100% convinced that he's stuck by that, or at least throughout his entire career of taking people's lives. Now, he will eventually cut the phone lines, and then he'll hide out in the trees, like in the backyard, waiting for this neighbor who keeps coming out and like smoking a cigar or something. And anytime the neighbor comes out and does this, it causes the sensor lights to go off and all this kind of stuff. So Israel's just like hanging tight back there, waiting for his moment. So then Israel removes the ventilation fan from the garage window and he gains access, and then he breaks a window and a door to unlock the door and get into the actual house. Now he has a headlamp on his forehead and he turns it on and makes his way down the hallway to the bedroom, and he wakes them up and zip ties them. Now Keyes would tell investigators that they were kind of like dazed and confused at first, right? Like any of us would be. And it takes them a minute to kind of realize that they're not dreaming, that this is real, that kind of a thing. And this is the part where I imagine this going on. I'm like, I cannot imagine the horror. This is one thing that I think of, and like this is one of the reasons we're going to do a sofa sidebar for a second. When I look at these cases, and I look at, how these go, and I think psychologically, and I look at myself like when I wake up just to go to the bathroom or the dog wants something, whatever, and you look at how kind of that groggy thing, and I'm like, what would you do if you were being woken up by an intruder? And not just an intruder who's trying to break in to get your TV, right? That's scary enough. This dude's coming in for you, but they don't really know that yet, but they do know, obviously, it's not good. Clearly, your adrenaline's going to kick in once you realize, whoa, okay, this is happening kind of a thing, but nonetheless, that level of shock, I cannot imagine it. My heart breaks for them that they went through this. Now, Israel would tell investigators that he had a gun on them. He makes them tell him where their guns are. He collects that stuff. He gets their debit cards, jewelry, prescription drugs, all this kind of stuff. Now, while he's going through their home, he would discover that he and Bill had served in the same division of the Army. And he would even tell Bill this, and he said that he did this thinking it might make Bill think that they had like a connection to make him kind of be calm, that kind of a thing. Then he tells them that they are going to be leaving the house, and he made them put on their slippers. So then he takes them out to the car, and he straps them into the seats of the car, and they begin to head out. Now, like with Samantha, he told them that this was a kidnapping for ransom situation. All of this is to keep them calm and manipulate them because he knows what he's going to do to them. So he takes them to an old abandoned farmhouse that he had been to earlier that day, checking out the town. He had already scoped this out. It was an empty house with a for sale sign out front, but was old and falling apart, and like literally nobody had been living in it for years type of a thing. Now this next part is absolutely horrifying, right? Okay, so just, trigger warning, that kind of a thing. So he takes Bill down to the basement and like ties him up, secures him or whatever. And then he goes back up and like apparently Lorraine had like gotten loose or something like that. So he takes Lorraine, he like gets her strapped in like to a bed or something like that or whatever. And then he gathers some stuff up and he goes back downstairs to the basement to where Bill is. Now, apparently Keyes wasn't like freely admitting this to the investigators and whatnot, but he was planning on going down and S-ing Bill. But Bill fought back really hard, that kind of a thing. And so Israel took a shovel and attacked Bill with it. Now, after he attacked Bill and Bill was obviously injured, Israel went, got his guns, all that kind of stuff, and came back and shot Bill several times. Now, again, the story just keeps getting worse and worse. So then he takes a cigarette break. He has a cigarette, and then he goes to where Lorraine is, and he will essay her a couple of different times. Now, I'm not sure if it was in the book or in articles that I was reading, or if he said it. It's kind of all blurry right now. But essentially, if you look at some of the, the dynamics of people who do this kind of stuff to other people, and I'm talking specifically about the SA type stuff. If you're not sure what the two initials mean, SA, just do the math on that. Or go down to the comments section. I'm sure somebody will explain it down there. But it's all about power, right? So him going to do that to Bill, number one, this is something that throws off investigators and whatnot, because, I mean, come on, like, this guy has just it's anything and, every which way for him, right? So, but Bill thwarted that for him, right? Bill, in a sense, I think they said emasculated him. I think that's the word. Because, I mean, there was that. So he was going to go take that out on Lorraine, right? And that he did. So he did this a couple of different times to Lorraine. Then, this is terrible. Oh my God. He takes her down to the basement to where Bill was, shows her Bill, and then takes a rope and strangles her. Now that part right there, I cannot imagine living your whole life. And I think for people, I'm in my 40s, right? So the more you live and all that, and you realize how precious, like anything can happen at any minute. And so to make it to retirement age or whatever, to survive life itself, and then to be taken out by a POS coward like this dude in this way is so disgusting to me. Anyways, so he does this to poor Lorraine, right? Well, then he piles their bodies up in the corner, and he takes some Drano, and he puts it on their hands and their faces, their bodies, all that kind of stuff, and he puts them in these big garbage bags. He puts them in the corner. He puts debris on top of them and whatnot. So then he takes their car and he leaves it in a Rite Aid parking lot where he had put his car in another parking lot. So he drops it off, goes to his car, gets in the car, and then he heads out of state to go visit his brothers like nothing happened, okay? And I'm just like, oh my gosh, I cannot imagine. So now he would tell investigators that when he came back after visiting, he drove past the house to see if the police presence were there, but there wasn't. So there's that. Now, listen, I'm going to make some commentary on my thoughts about that whole little thing right there, and I guess I should go ahead and do it now. It's not very much. So that dynamic right there of being okay. Now, he initially talked about burning the house down, right? And we might talk about this again here a little bit, but he initially talked about doing that, but then he was just like, you know what, there's no police when I came back. So I was like, you know what, screw it. If anyone ends up buying the house, they'll end up tearing it down, and they'll just think that it's old animals or varmints or something that died and that kind of a thing. And I'm like this. I'm like, for someone who is so careful, and I mean, and maybe that's the thing where, I mean, I guess in the business of taking people out, because I'm just like, why would you leave their bodies like that? I mean, like, when somebody find them, I would be paranoid about that, right? But he just seemed to be like, whatever. I mean, it just went on his merry way. But I guess if you're willing to do these kind of horrifying things to people, you think differently, right? I mean, that can answer my own damn question there. Anyways, okay, so the house would eventually be demolished, okay, leaving only the hopes of their bodies being found in a landfill. Now, agents would painfully pick through tons and tons of garbage in hopes of finding their bodies, but the bodies would never be found. Again, that just absolutely haunts me to my core. This is the kind of absolute monster you are dealing with, right? Now, remember how he said, and we discussed earlier, where he was like, I don't want, people who have dogs and kids are off limits. Well, here's what I want to talk about for this next person. And this one is more of like an alleged victim, that kind of a thing. And this is a younger person. Mind you, he would have been younger. The age discrepancies would have been less, if you will. But nonetheless, we're going to talk about her. Now, her name is Julie Marie Harris. She was 12 years old, and she disappeared on March 3rd, 1996. Now, Julie was a Special Olympics athlete. She had 2 prosthetic feet, and she disappeared. She was walking to church, and we're going to talk about that more in depth here in a minute, like the circumstances surrounding that. But she vanished from Colville, and she was like walking or waiting for a ride to church, something along those lines. Now, her feet were discovered discovered the prosthetic feet were discovered at the mouth of the Colville River, and the next year her skeletal remains were found. Now, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to read and comment on an article about the case. It's like talking to her mother and that kind of a thing, because again, this has never been solved. But I want to talk about that specific day, and then we're going to talk about how Israel possibly could relate to this crime. This is not something that he was admitting to or anything like that, but the ties to it kind of make you go, huh. Okay, so I'm going to put a little screen up here that shows you the article that we're looking at. The article name is Q6 Cold Case Murder on Main Street. This is by Haley Gunther. This is through KHQ Local News Reporter, or she is a KHQ Local News Reporter anchor. It shows that this is last updated on August 4th, 2020, so a couple of years ago. And it says that the article took place, or the articles, the location of Stevens County, Washington is what I'm trying to say here and say. I'm just going to go through and talk about some of the key points of this article and comment on them, because I think the story that we hear about what Julie's last day on Earth was like, or this, the alleged last day, the events surrounding it, is honestly heartbreaking. So I just want to talk about that for a minute. So Julie's mother, Sherry, says that her daughter was taken while trying to do what she loved. She says that she loved God. She went to church all the time, she said, and that's what she was doing the day this happened. Sherry says that Julie was a funny kid and a bit of a prankster. She was very involved in Special Olympics. She recalls the final conversation with her daughter being a stern one. She had to come down on Julie because of her poor grade. When I told her she could do Special Olympics skiing, I told her she needed to keep her grades up. That was the deal. She had F's. She couldn't go. But Sherry says Julie's brother, who was also involved in Special Olympics, was able to go on the ski trip. She went with him, and Julie was angry to be left behind. She vanished the next morning, March 3rd, Sherry said. She always waited. The people up on the road would take her to church. Her brother wasn't going to go, obviously, because we were on the trip. Julie got up, got ready like normal, and no one ever saw her again. Okay, let's pause for a second. Almost to cry, okay? That, I'm like, oh my God. So first of all, I mean, they're just doing, I get it. I mean, how many of us had situations like that with our parents where it's like, it's this or that? My thing was like doing plays and stuff like that. You had to keep your grades up to do this. Bless her little heart for still getting up and being like, I'm still going to church. I'm still going to do this. And shame on whatever absolute monster took this child's life. I cannot, and my heart goes out to this mother. I can't imagine like resting with that on my shoulders, even though I don't look at it in any sense of like, oh, well, it's the mother's fault, anything like that by any means. I mean, you never know these things, right? You have to raise your children the best that you see how. And when you encounter monsters along the way, we don't think that this kind of horrible stuff is going to happen, right? You don't think this stuff. I mean, this is so out there. Anyways, let's keep reading. So the article continues. Sherry's former live-in boyfriend was among the final people to see her alive, she says. He too was apparently on Julie about her grades before she disappears. Now, apparently, the article says, the boyfriend had remained on police radar, but Julie had never suspected that he had anything to do with this. Now, she said it would be a month before there were any leads on what happened, and there are rumors that Julie had run away. And Sherry said at one point, the article was stating that, she was like, well, maybe this is what happened. Maybe she's laying low. Maybe she made her way to Spokane. But then she said that she was told something very disturbing. And I'm going to read directly from the article about this part because this is very interesting. She says, the article states, a witness had seen her walking down Main Street with a tall guy in a trench coat, she said. Sherry says after hearing that, she was convinced something awful happened to her daughter. I thought somebody kidnapped her, she said. We had a weird connection, Julie and me. About 6 months after she vanished, I just knew. It was in the middle of the day, and I just knew. It was something. I knew. I think I was at the park. I was on my knees screaming and crying. But it would be about 6 more months until she got official confirmation of what she already feared was true. It was a friend of mine who said they found a body, she said. I went to the police station and they said, yeah, what do you know? Sherry says she believes police have suspected she was either involved or knew something from the get-go. She says her former boyfriend remained a clear person of interest, but she was convinced they were wasting time looking at him. Julie loved him like a teddy bear, she said. Julie and him had a really good relationship. Because let's pause this for a second. Again, just rips your damn heart out. But, here's the thing. When it talked about her walking down Main Street with a guy in a trench coat, now, in a second, we're going to talk about this because Israel was very young at this time, right? This is not him as like an adult. Remember him and Samantha, how he was like walking around, he had the whole gun thing and all that kind of stuff? Well, imagine somebody telling this to a 13-year-old. If he could do this with, if other people, you know what I'm saying? And I'm not trying to sit here and be a little Mr. Conspiracy Theorist, but the ties of possibly, and we're going to talk some more about it or whatever, it's just one of those things, right? Also, we see these stories time and time again. Now, here's the thing. I don't know the details of this case. This is literally one side of it. There's multiple sides to a story. Of people always start at the center and look outwards, that kind of a thing. But we see this repeated all the time of, somebody thinks, there's a rumor that they did it and this did that kind of thing. So anyways, let's continue. Now the article says that KHQ called the sheriff's office to ask if anyone had been cleared, and the sheriff said that no, the former boyfriend remains a person of interest, but he added they have kept their minds open to other possibilities. And one of them is the notorious serial killer Israel Keys. He too has never been cleared as a person of interest in Julie's murder. Sherry says she first heard about Keys being on the radar for her daughter's case more than 15 years after she died. It was 2012, someone called me, I don't remember who, she said, maybe a reporter, and said, do you think Israel Keys killed Julie? And I said, I don't know who that is. That's when Sherry said she started doing some digging and was sent photos of Keys in his younger years. She learned when Keys was about 18, he lived in Stevens County near them. Are y'all listening to this? My God. Okay, now that I saw the picture of that guy, Israel Keys, now that I saw the picture of him while he was younger, I remember him at a house Julie used to go to, she said, and I had just an icky feeling about him. That line's incorrect. That's why I'm reading it that way. Sherry says memories she thought were irrelevant at the time may have come back to her regarding Israel Keys in the neighborhood. She says Julie's best friend also remembers seeing Israel Keys talk to Julie at the local swimming pool. Now the article then goes into how he took his life and all that kind of stuff. Sherry believes Keys' first murder victim may be her daughter. I think there is something that will show she was the first, she said. Sherry says she's hopeful answers will one day find their grieving family. And then she goes into the world's missed out knowing her daughter, I'm sure. Okay, so that being said, I mean, can you imagine? So just like the article said, where like these memories trigger. Now here's the thing. And I want this to stand out about this article as a learning lesson for all of us listening and whatnot, myself included. These cold cases, these things like this, you see how she had all this in her mind, and it was like, bam, well, wait a minute. I do remember that guy. He was the thing. The best friend does remember her doing it. You know what I'm saying? Now, it could be a dead end, it could be this, but isn't it interesting how this triggered all these memories? This is why these cases like this are so important, to keep their faces and names in the media, their stories going, their voices, continuing to be out there, because somebody doesn't know what they know, if that makes sense. And then there's other times where people know, but say things change, relationships change, things like that. And so somebody might not be with somebody anymore, they're harboring secrets or whatever, you never know. And I'm not saying specifically that kind of stuff for this situation right here, but this is just so fascinating to me, because I'm like, here's a clear case of why it's so important to keep these cases in front of the public for this very reason. So there's that article. That's why I wanted to go over it, because it was so fascinating to me and really went into depth of that. My heart breaks for this family and this mother. I mean, what can you say, right? I mean, it's absolutely horrible. And in fact, if you're still watching, drop hearts for Julie, obviously all of his victims, but just show some love for Julie and her mother. I mean, it just breaks my heart reading this. Now, Keys would tell investigators that, he was aware of this case, he's aware of this crime, but that he was not involved in it. And he would say, this is where he would kind of like divulge the information of, looking at the birth of my daughter, with that, I was like, I'm not going after kids, and that's what kind of kept me from doing that. But Julie came after the birth of his daughter, right? So even if that was true, like if that was like I draw a line in the sand kind of a situation, that happened afterwards, right? So there's that. Now, Keyes would actually claim, he was like, no, that's not my first victim, right? He's saying that he didn't even do that, right? But he is saying that his first victim was in 1997 or 1998. And this is when he would abduct and SA a young woman near Bend, Oregon. And basically he would end up letting this person go. This is like some kind of like a river or something like that. And after that, he was like, I decided I never would let anyone go again. Like things got really weird or something like that. So he does this. That was like his first victim, or first attempt at, the big M, but it didn't go that far. So he says that after that, it was soon after that, well, I mean, not that he said, the evidence shows that he joins the Army. And then soon after that, that brings us to another alleged potential victim named Debra Fieldman. So the FBI believes that Debra Fieldman was also a victim of Israel Keyes. She was last seen alive on April 8th, 2009 at her residence in Hackensack, New Jersey. At the time of her disappearance, she was 49 years old. Now, Debra's story is just a very sad, tragic story all around. Her son Matthew and her estranged husband had always been left wondering what really happened to her. So one morning, the father sees something on the news, and it's the announcement that the FBI believed that she was one of Keyes' victims. And for the dad and son, it was kind of like, it makes sense, but it was also something that could lead to answers for them and closure. So Debra disappeared from her apartment back in 2009. Now, this is the same time that it was alleged that Israel Keyes abducted a woman from an East Coast state and then drove her to New York, took her life, and buried her somewhere up there. Now, what makes it hard with cases like this is it sounds like she was a drifter. It sounded like she had a lot of issues going on, maybe with substances, things of that nature. Maybe she was doing particular things to get money for said substances. She was in a high-risk lifestyle. And this is when I said the husband was estranged, the dad and son were like, whatever happened to her? This is where this is coming from. So it makes it very difficult. And also, when I say high-risk lifestyle, people who do things like Israel Keyes know this about that lifestyle, and they treat these people oftentimes as a training camp, right? Or like a victim pool, right? Because they're just like, well, I can get away with this very easily, unfortunately for these victims, right? And unfortunately in this case for Debra. So on this particular one, the FBI said that when they were doing, like asking questions and showing potential victims and all this kind of stuff, they would like slide pictures. And typically, we've already discussed like some of the stories where he would get like physically excited, like almost like he was going to go into like a self-pleasure type thing. He would sit there and say things like, nope, don't know him, nope. But when they slid Debra's picture to him, he was like, I'm not ready to talk about her yet. So this is where they were kind of like, okay, this might be, whatever. They painstakingly were painting, and putting together and piecing together this picture of his timeline and going with, missing persons people, in these areas and that kind of thing. And this is what they were able to do. And unfortunately, because of that, just like with so many of these crimes that we see, these victims in Israel are really the only ones that are going to ever know what truly happened. Now, I want to conclude talking about these victims with a case that is tied to this. And when I say tied to it, it's a lot of speculation, and we'll talk about my personal thoughts on do I think he had something to do with it after we go over it. But it's called, I call it the Boca Mall murders. So this case is unsolved still. It took place back in 2007, and I can remember being in this area then and hearing about this. So this is one of the things that was sparked me with Israel Keyes is, when there's things about, was he this person? Was he the Boca Mall man? That I just put two and two together. I was like, oh my God, I've shopped at this mall, I live 45 minutes away from it for a while, right? So it's very creepy to me. So let's watch a couple of clips real quick just to kind of all get on the same page about what this is about.
In August of 2007, a woman we've only identified as Jane Doe drove up to the valet stand at Town Center Mall and said she had just been carjacked and kidnapped.
She said that she had been abducted from the mall along with her small child by an individual that she later described as being about 6 foot tall, possibly Brazilian, long ponytail, wearing driving gloves and a floppy hat and glasses. She indicated that she had been abducted as she left the mall at gunpoint, driven to a bank in the area, forced to withdraw money, taken to a secondary location where she was tied up again in a different manner, there were some unique features to the way she was restrained. Handcuffs were used, zip ties were used, and there was a form of sensory deprivation on her eyes where she was put initially with glasses on, and later she was put on with goggles with a sponge inside them. Again, trying to block out the what she saw around her as she was driving.
So, as you can imagine, this was an absolutely horrifying event for this woman and child. However, they were lucky to get out alive because this dude, alleged dude, I mean, we don't know who it was, but we can assume it, obviously the description is a guy, had no chill at all coming, moving forward, right? So the goggles, the description, all that, it very much feels like an Israel Keys vibe, right? Now let's go ahead and listen to another clip about another case where they weren't so lucky to make it out.
4 months later, shortly before midnight, on December 12, 2007, a security guard at the Town Center Mall noticed a 2007 black Chrysler Aspen with its engine running parked near the south side of Sears at the Town Center Mall. Responding officers found Nancy Boquicchio and her 7-year-old daughter Joey bound and shot.
As soon as we responded to the scene, there was some parallels to the August case. We immediately knew that there was definitive links between that case and the August case.
So remember the original case where the mother and child got away? Well, there was all these similarities to it, right? So after the mother put the son in the car, she went to get in the car, she looks back, there's a man pointing a gun, gets forced into the car, they have to go to the ATM. Just like in the case where they lost their life. Now, at some point during the ordeal, the kidnapper will bound the woman with handcuffs and zip ties. This is preventing her from seeing, all that kind of stuff. They put blackout sunglasses on her at first, and then later he makes them wear goggles with a sponge inside to block the light. Now, that's very weird. I guess from a criminal point of view, it's like, okay, cool, you're making sure they can't see anything you're doing, whatever. Now, after driving around, the kidnapper left the woman and her son in the SUV in the mall parking lot. I absolutely cannot imagine the absolute horror that they went through with that. What a horrifying way to leave this earth.
Within hours of Nancy and Joey's murders, Nancy's credit cards and cell phone were found in Miami. And it was also discovered that the zip ties and duct tape used to bound the mother and daughter were also purchased at a large box store in Miami.
Okay, now I said that I would talk about what I think as to whether, this was Keys or not. So I go back and forth. Ultimately, I do not think that this was Israel Keys. One thing is just what we heard. These were bought from a big box store in Miami. I just feel like it's not his MO, right? It seems like him, and then the description of him, which I'll put some overlays up here so you can see. Yes, there are similarities there. I get it. There is that. And those are some of the things that make me say, well, maybe it could be. I don't know. But the whole thing of it being local like that and all that, the kids involved, that kind of a thing, him leaving them alive, I don't know. It sounds like someone just as deranged. Sadly, there's multiple people out there like that, but possibly not Keys. So now let's get into the description of the person who was allegedly doing all this. So the woman described her kidnapper as about 6 feet tall with a long brown ponytail, who wore driving gloves, a floppy hat, kind of like a military style boonie cap, and glasses. Now he was only getting like $500 from these robberies. So you can see kind of how there's like this little similarity of Keys there and all that kind of stuff. So yes, there is that. I get it. Now, also in addition to the murders and the person who was allowed to live, there was another victim named Randy Gorenberg, 52 years old, of Boca Raton, who was killed after she left the Town Center Mall on March 23rd of 2007. Now, the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office believes she too was kidnapped from the mall. She was shot, left at a park in West Delray Beach. It is also an unsolved murder. Now, John McVeigh, who's an FBI agent, he described this theory where, with the IDs that they were finding and stuff like this, where he was thinking almost like there could be other victims, because what he was saying is basically, I think that this person who's doing this is taking their IDs and possibly threatening them and saying, I know where you live. If you say anything, I will be coming to get you, this kind of a thing. And so there could be other people out there who have had this, but they're too afraid to come forward, right? And so that's why it's like, well, maybe something happened with these people who he did kill, but there could be other people out there who survived but are too scared to come forward. So obviously they're begging people, please come forward. Now, one thing I want to do is put up some of the FBI timeline here to look during this time of 2007, just to kind of show and look at where all he was. And so let's just go ahead and do that right now. So even just looking at some of the December dates in here, we see that, a lot of his stuff, he's over in Washington area, that kind of place. We have over here, let's see, December 4th. That's my birthday. Hi. First of all, Washington, license plate, Seattle, Washington. Washington's the next one. Tacoma International Airport. Let's see, vehicle rental enterprise. Silver Mitsubishi driver did not have permission to leave state. Fort Wayne, Indiana. Vehicle rental 13 Dodge Caliber, Washington, license plate, Seattle. Kingston, Washington. Sequoia, Washington. So here's the thing. So even when I look at things like this, we also know how Israel was. Planes, trains, automobiles was this man's MO, right? This man knew how to go off grid in a sense. So even though it's like, oh, well, he was like all around here, this man, you never know, y'all, right? So that's the thing. So again, my final take on the Boca murders is I do not think it was him, but because of just how his style was, you never know. So there's that. Anyways, what we're going to do now is for the next video, we will be focusing in on the interrogation video. I'm going to go through and start watching that, making some clips to talk about the different parts of that. So that's it. There's obviously way more other alleged victims and all that. I've just focused on a few that stuck out to me for the case. So if there's any particular that you want me to look at some point, we can do it in a live chat or whatnot. Just drop it in the comments down below. Again, thank you everybody for being here. Please drop hearts, sofas, you name it. Doggy prints for Roscoe. This one probably was traumatizing for him to listen to, but especially hearts for the victims, because this is horrible ways that these people went at the hands of this absolute monster. Thank God he is not breathing the same air that we are anymore. I hope everybody in the Sofa Squad is doing wonderful today. Again, thank you for joining and thank you for making the Sofa Squad possible. I really appreciate it from the bottom of my heart. And until we meet back at that damn sofa again, well, I'll see y'all soon.